Hello, I'm Ryan Cook, and this is Civic Tech Chat, a show that looks at the way technology, politics, and policy impacts the world around us, the tools we use, the way services are delivered, and how we talk about and set policy all shape our society. We'll gather around and have a chat about these things together and more. Before we get started, I do want to let you all know that we've started a Discord for the podcast. There will be a link with an invite down in the episode description. Do feel free to go check that out. It's a small community right now, but hoping to grow it. It's a great way to reach out to me and let me know things that you might want us to cover, or to just hang out and talk about civic tech. Mike, thank you so much for joining us here on Civic Tech Chat. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Certainly. So I am a Drupal core accessibility maintainer, being active in open source for a long time. I am a open standards and practices lead at Civic Actions. I've been involved in accessibility and sustainability issues for a number of years, and I really work to. I believe that the government has a really important role to go off and to address the serious challenges that we're facing as a species, and that we need to go off and learn to have government be able to more effectively meet the needs of citizens.
And what would you say is your personal why, the thing that drives you to get out of bed each morning and do what you do?
It's just that the opportunity, seeing the potential to make things better, to be able to have an impact on the world. And I mean, I certainly, when I was a business owner, it was really quite interesting to go off and to see that the opportunity to go off and to have an impact. But then I became a Drupal core accessibility maintainer, and it's fascinating to be able to influence a community that just drives so much the web. It's a really great opportunity to be able to explore and to really feel that you are able to make an impact that's bigger than the day-to-day grind that we all have to go through.
And you mentioned the Drupal community there, which sounds like something in particular that's kind of drawn you toward it in your personal why. What is it about that community that kind of makes you want to be a part of it?
Well, the phrase is that there's often talked about in the Drupal community is come for the code, stay for the community, and it's a large, very engaging community of people who are developing collectively a content management system, and it's really quite a powerful tool. And there's some really amazing people that are part of it that I've learned so much from, and in a way that I've been able to contribute to them. So there's the phrase in the open source community that you're standing on the shoulders of giants, and I just happen to know who some of those giants are, and have been able to learn from them and benefit from being able to work with them.
The mention of a key web technology is maybe a nice segue into our topic, which is web accessibility. When we use that phrase accessibility, in regards to the web, what are we really talking about? Why is it important to think about that when we're building all these web services?
So it's really interesting when we're in this modern digital age that we don't really have a real sense of who has disabilities and how people are engaging and interacting with the world around us. For example, I can't tell if you have any vision issues. It doesn't look like you're wearing glasses, but you might be wearing contacts. As far as I know, you may or may not be somebody who's in a wheelchair. Again, I see you in a chair, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean anything. I just but also from a digital perspective, so much of how we work and engage with the world is now coming through these digital devices, and I think that we're so often forgetting that there's people who experience the world in different ways than we do. So if you only are writing for one medium, you're excluding people. And you can be excluding, if you look at permanent disabilities, different agencies calculate it differently, but it's often calculated at about a quarter of the population has a disability. Now, that may not be a physical ability that would restrict them from going up and down stairs and whatnot, but it may be something that, like dyscalculia or dyslexia, that makes it difficult for them to read. So it's something that's just a greater awareness about the human condition and the importance of building for everyone, because we all have a role.
you say 20, like around 25% of the population. I mean, if you're out there trying to build a web service to try to reach, the populace, you're probably holding yourself back if you're limiting yourself from being able to reach such a large group.
Absolutely, especially if you're looking at things like, seniors. Like, as we grow older, we develop more disabilities. Our eyesight starts going down after 40, sometimes earlier. Our ability to remember things, our control, our fine motor control. It's particularly important in aging cultures or aging societies where you have a lot of people who are less able to go off and engage, and yet have gotten very comfortable and dependent on the digital tools that they've learned to use.
In the Web Almanac chapter, you mentioned something that's maybe like closely related to what we're talking about here about trying to reach communities, and that you mentioned that accessibility is not just morally good, but ultimately something that's good for democracy. Can you add a bit more to that phrasing you've kind of brought in here?
Yeah. So just to back up on the Web Almanac. So the HTTP Archive is an organization that's part of the Internet Archive, and they have been writing an annual review of the web for a number of years. They missed the 2023 because of personal issues, but it's a really interesting opportunity to sort of have a snapshot of what has happened in the year. And what changes have happened in the web. And they scanned over 17 million web pages for all kinds of issues on the code quality, CSS, security issues. They're really trying to go off and get a good snapshot of where the web is for that year. And so I wanted to get involved in the accessibility chapter and the sustainability chapter because these are both issues that I'm concerned about. I didn't expect to go off and to end up authoring the chapter itself when I got involved, but it turned out that I needed to step up and to do that. But in terms of your question about it being a morally good thing, like we really do need to be able to go off and to speak to citizens and to engage with all citizens, not just the citizens who are able-bodied or can use digital technology. We need to be able to bring people into to using this technology and being able to interact with government in order to get the services that they're frankly paying for, and should be able to access in a way that is beneficial to them. And it's no different if we're in 2025 we're not satisfied with the idea of excluding women from voting, or people who are not property owners, or denying people access to the ability to vote based on the color of their skin. These are all things that we've all decided are not useful for a modern democracy. And accessibility is just another one where we need to have people be able to engage with their government in a means that they're capable of based on their abilities.
I think I'm hearing a theme of participation in there, and maybe from some different angles. So obviously, if you're running a government service, well, you want everyone to be able to use it. But if you're not even at the state where you're governing it, say you're someone who's in the political campaigning portion of it, well, you want people to engage with your ideas. So you probably should be accessible there so people can actually know what you stand for. If you're a news organization, you're in that kind of branch of things, well, you want an informed public. So you probably want to make it so people can actually get access to the things you're producing. If you're someone who kind of does more of the social media thing, you probably hope that network is accessible so that when you kind of try to have that conversation, people can actually get to it. Am I kind of like onto a theme that you're pointing to correctly there?
Absolutely. Like it is important on all of those layers, but also people within the government as well, like the public sector employees that are engaging with us. They also have disabilities. It's not simply the public. It's also the staff of our agencies because disability is so prevalent in just part of the human condition that we need to be able to anticipate that and prepare for it.
As we talk about disability, something I noticed in your writing, you referred to the Microsoft's inclusive design guidelines, which talk about disability as something that can have a temporal context, which I found pretty interesting. Some situations are temporary, while others might be more permanent.
Yeah,
What's your take on that kind of that approach to thinking about it?
I do really like it, which is why I keep promoting it and talking about this approach. And it really, there's a misconception that accessibility is just, about that one blind guy who uses a screen reader and can't access this content. But it's really so much bigger than that, because our ability to go off and to navigate through this our technologies does change over time, and we all will occasionally have limitations to how we engage with digital services. So, for example, if you're getting an eye exam, you may get eye drops in your eyes that go off and make your vision blurry for a few hours afterwards. Or if you've got allergies, that's another great opportunity, another time where people's vision may not be as good as it is at other times. Even if you've got like, we had a call scheduled earlier where I had a cough. And there's no easy way at this point to be able to go and have um, to use assistive technology to completely replicate my voice in a way that would be useful for a podcast. But we postponed that meeting because I was under the weather. I was fine to go off and to do a lot of work, but if I was going to be talking for a prolonged period of time, like in a podcast, I wouldn't be able to do that. So trying to go off and think about the all of those issues. Also, just in terms of the situation where you happen to be in. If it's a sunny day and you're outside with your phone and you're trying to go off and find the address where you're meeting somebody, and you've got a light gray text on a light gray background, like that doesn't work for most people. Or if you're in a noisy bar and you're trying to go off and engage with Siri, likewise, it's not something that is going to work particularly well if you're in an area that is noisy, which is not dissimilar from ways that people with permanent disabilities are trying to engage with technology. So it's just trying to go off and make it easier for people to understand how this is just helping everyone use technology that the way they want to, in however and wherever they happen to be.
As we think about this topic, what role, if any, do you envision governments playing in the goal to improve web accessibility?
They have a huge role, both in terms of their legislation, which has really been fundamental to going and improving accessibility around the world. The U.S. really played a enormous role in taking with Section 508 in the late 90s, and the Americans with Disability Act, and countries around the world have really only began to make a jump when it's being clear that there's a stick associated with not thinking about accessibility. It absolutely should be something that everyone does consider. Certainly for businesses, there's a huge incentive to having to thinking about accessibility issues and serving people with disabilities, whether you're a small restaurant or whether you're a big web company. There are advantages simply in terms of being able to access more people. The UK has an interesting report where they have looked at this and described it as the purple pound. It's the amount of money that the disability community spends, and often it's not just the disability community, but it's also everyone else that is yeah, it's people who come with them, the family, the friends, who are also spending money with that person because they want to go off and to support them, or enjoy dinner with them. Like that all is part of this survey that the UK has implemented. But before governments actually started to go and take it seriously and put legislation in place, a lot of times most organizations around the world have seen it as a nice optional thing to have, but not something they've actually invested money in. The other thing that's worthwhile is that governments are by far the largest procurer of goods and services in the world. So if governments were able to get together and to look at how they spend money and say, we need the people who supply us goods and services to build them so that they're available for everyone and can work no matter what disabilities they may have, then that would be a huge thing to try and advance the market for everyone. in the US, this is part of Section 508, and in Europe, it's part of the Europeans for Accessibility Act, which is coming into effect this July, I believe. Um, but yeah, procurement is a huge part of this, trying to build those incentives so that just like security isn't an option for digital products, we should not see accessibility as an option for digital products either. That we want to make sure that all of our products can be used by people regardless of their abilities.
Also, with that last bit, it sounds a bit like the government has a role in modeling proper behavior. So by creating those requirements on in order to serve the government and help the government serve others, it models what the government wishes to see others do with their
Yeah,
communities that they serve. Am I kind of hearing that correctly?
it's modeling, but it's more than that. I mean, it's if all the governments around the world got together and told Microsoft, we need to go off and have these accessibility tools built in to all of your products before we're able to buy them, Microsoft would take it more seriously than they do now. And I mean, Microsoft has made real inroads recently in accessibility, but there's definitely a lot of stuff that they miss and a lot of aggressions that happen for users with disabilities who have to struggle to go out and have a consistent level of service with products even from Apple and Microsoft. It's still something that needs more attention. But if the governments were able to put this into the contract and put real teeth into this, then the large companies and the small companies would learn how to go and to actually build products where accessibility is not an afterthought, where there is integrated testing in this that serves everyone and not just government.
When you mention bring kind of countries coming together for it, it sounds a bit like you might be pro some sort of like international concord between nations that are like trying to maybe have like some somewhat similar frameworks for what to require of companies. Am I hearing that correctly, or not so much?
It, it would be, I think there are advantages to that, and but even within, I mean, so many projects and governments are so siloed that there isn't really much of an opportunity to get cooperation or collaboration even within a given agency or department to work on a project and collaborate and use their collective force even within that agency. The U.S. could do so much even on its own, trying to engage with the people that they buy technology from, and certainly if there's collaboration on the state and local level to try and build towards accessible open standards that are geared towards interoperability. I think we'd have and well documented, secured. Like if governments were able to go and to think beyond the project and cooperate with each other in order to say we need to raise the bar so that everyone gets better services from government, the technology that government buys, then I think we go further. But everything's so specific to the project and there's so little sharing between government agencies about best practices and what they've learned. So yeah, I think that an international approach could be fine, but it's not necessary, especially with a government as large as the American government.
We've mentioned 508, for example, as maybe one like particular standard. What if any others are there out there that you think folks should be striving to work towards as they're like thinking about their own services, or is that kind of the place to be?
508 is good, especially since the refresh that took place in within the Obama administration. One of the last things that they did was to update the Section 508 guidelines to align with the international standard, which at the time was WCAG 2.0 AA. Since that time, the WCAG standards have moved on. And although the states presently are responsible, state legislations or state governments and municipal governments now need to go off and need to be WCAG 2.1 compliant. So there's been an upgrade for the states, but not for the federal government. Um, I think that in terms of other standards, the big one that the U.S. needs to look at and learn from is Europe and their EN 301549. And in this case, Europe has a separate standards body that has created a set of guidelines that is very similar to Section 508, has a lot to learn from it, but it's also it's being updated on a regular time period. So you know that there's going to be a standards body that's going to review the WK guidelines and bring this into a European standard that can make sure that it is being that is relevant and still useful for the citizens of Europe to be able to have a modern digital experience and an equitable modern digital experience. Right now, if you're looking at Section 508 for the in the context of the federal government, the guidelines that they're required to stick towards are WCAG 2.0 AA, as I said. That was released the year after the first iPhone was released. So if you think about like how old that is, like that's December 2008. How much has the web changed since December 2008? And if we're looking at accessibility guidelines, we shouldn't be looking at guidelines that are that old as what we're defining our accessibility guidance on. Like the web has changed enormously since 2008, and the standards that we're using for our government should reflect that.
And I think you mentioned something more up to date would be WCAG 2.1. Did I hear that
Two,
correctly?
2.1, actually, the latest recommended release from the Web Accessibility Initiative is WCAG 2.2. And that's something that EN 301549 is considering for the next release. And it has a lot of additional features in it that address things that were missed in the previous versions of WCAG.
So then it sounds like then if someone has the wherewithal and like the autonomy to be able to do so, going for compliance with like the standard set at the 2.2 version is probably the best move if you have to pick. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely. But also if you're thinking about how software is being built and how software projects, the life cycle of a software project, it is always more expensive to retrofit a software project. If you're going to um, try and like you shouldn't be building for the standards that your project is required to legally when you're first developing the RFP for a piece for a digital tool. You should be looking at what the standards are likely to be when throughout the lifespan of your digital product. And if it's going to take a year or two for the project to be built, and you're hoping it will have a lifespan of 5 years, well, why would you do anything else other than trying to build towards WK 2.2? I mean, you could hope that maybe there'll be some grandfather clause that would allow you to go off into delay upgrading your code to WK 2.2. But forward-thinking organizations should be thinking about how do we build that best user experience, and already the best user experience has been defined as being WK 2.2. So why would you not try and aim for that?
I think your answer is a great segue to the next question I had jotted down here, which was talking about, how do you recommend teams ensure that accessibility work is properly prioritized as they go through design and build steps? Like, how do you make sure it's not a thing that's like left to the end? Like, as we talk about, like, let's do 2.2, for example. Like, how do you make that
Yeah.
part of the process at the start?
So I think that it's important to take a role-based approach. That any digital product right now involves designers, content people, front-end people, back-end people. Like there's a range of skills that are needed to build a modern digital website, and every role has a connection to accessibility in one way or the other. So a usability person, there's a number of success criteria that relate specifically to usability. There's others related to visual design, like color contrast, for example, is a great one that is, you know, a bigger issue for visual designers than it is for others. There's different steps that are required for those. So I'm part of a WC3 community group called ARM, is the Accessible Roles and Responsibilities Mapping, where we're trying to take all of these success criteria and map them against the standard roles that are used in our industry. Um, so that's part of it, is trying to diversify the responsibility, so it's not all sitting on the shoulders of one person. Another thing is to bring in your project management focus and making sure that how is accessibility dealt with in your project sprints? Are you looking to see that when you're building in a CI/CD pipeline, that your list of URLs that you're building are going to be including things like yeah, a lot of times the CI/CD pipelines address URLs that were relevant a few months or even a few years ago, but you really want to make sure that is actually looking at the issues that your team is presently building on that would be affected, so that if there's any changes that are happening in that code base, that they're going to be caught by the CI/CD pipeline. So in terms of looking at project management, and organizing for successful accessibility completion. It's also useful to have champions, somebody who's on the team, who's not necessarily an accessibility expert, but who's willing to go off and learn about accessibility, to talk with others, to be able to reach out to say, how do we take the best practices that are being used elsewhere and bring it to our community. There are frankly so many resources out there on web accessibility, and there's so much to learn about how people interact with technology that partly is just trying to be aware of what's happening outside your project and finding ways to bring that in so that you can help educate and make others more aware about how they can produce more inclusive content. And it's also partly just changing your definition of quality, so that quality is, you're not producing quality work if your work isn't accessible.
Would your approach change at all if you were thinking about it from the perspective of someone who has to kind of influence from the outside, like that classic kind of consultant kind of dilemma? Maybe you're a partner with a government agency or even like a private organization. You're trying to convince them that, hey, like we really need to have accessibility front of mind as we're putting things together. How would you suggest folks kind of approach trying to advocate for that?
I think partly it's reminding people about how this is something that isn't a fringe issue. This is something that benefits everyone. Again, if it's a quarter of the population has a disability, it you'd have to be a pretty insular person not to know somebody who has trouble reading or has difficulty accessing the web. Maybe it's your parents. Maybe it's a friend of a friend. Maybe it's your colleague. But there are going to be just reminding them about the people in their lives that are having difficulty, and standards like WK do not inspire people. That does not motivate people to act. But realizing that this is really about humanity and making sure that you can communicate your ideas and that they are that you're able to go off and to have as much future compatibility as possible, whether that's to yourself, because any of us can have a disability from one day to the next. There's my vision last year was better than it is today. I'm having to go off and start wearing glasses for reading now because my eyesight is deteriorating. That wasn't the case even a year ago. So trying to keep that in mind, but also in terms of future technologies, like we we know that artificial intelligence is becoming more important in our lives, and if we can build semantic structures to make sure there's no confusion for humans or for bots, I think that we're going to be able to make sure that there's that authors are able to go off and more clearly communicate their intent to readers and have a more effective communication between people. And even if that involves bots, it's really about being able to have that clearer communication of intent between people.
As folks maybe get past that prioritization stuff and get into the work with it, in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges that teams face when it comes to trying to make their services accessible?
And so much of the time, it's about just a lack of awareness and a lack of knowledge of what is out there and what is fairly easy for people to implement. So there's a lot of automated tools out there that people can use that can make accessibility much easier. But then once they learn that, they sort of people tend to lean on those tools and just sort of assume that if you get 100 in Google Lighthouse on accessibility, you're good. But that's unfortunately not the case. All of these automated tools, they all they can do is test certain elements of WCAG and determine whether or not there's a failure of that test. So all you know from an automated accessibility scan is that a certain number of the tests passed or failed. But that doesn't tell you if you're meeting WCAG, because WCAG is much more complicated and nuanced than that. And ultimately, it's helping people understand that you're not building for standards. You're not trying to build for these automated tools. You're trying to build for people. So how do we try and support those people to see that people with lived experience with disability are really appreciated, and for their expertise in how they navigate and work with digital systems, and how do we try and make sure that the tools and the user experience, whether it's an oral experience with somebody that uses a screen reader, or perhaps it's somebody who navigates with a keyboard and not a mouse. How do we make sure that they're able to go off and bring their expertise into this, so that we're able to actually ensure that our work is helping real people with disabilities.
With how you describe that towards the end, it sounds a bit like it's that classic thing where you can't rely wholly on a quantitative approach or a qualitative approach. You have to kind of take in both and see, like, maybe the testing is your quantitative thing, like, oh, it gives you
Right.
some signal, but then it's not going to tell you the whole story. So you go out and you try to get personal stories, or stories of folks that are like engaging with your tool using some of the things you're hoping folks are able to use. Am I kind of like getting that thread correctly,
Yeah.
where you're pointing?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's things that, like, automated tools can be used for so much. I mean, we were able to, using Google Lighthouse and the web accessibility, the Web Almanac and the accessibility chapter of that, scanned 17 million domains, and I think twice as many pages, because there was the primary page and secondary page that were scanned as part of that. Like, the amount of knowledge that we have, that we could gather through automated testing is just in for that qualitative the quantitative information is just so much. It's so impressive and so valuable to get a sense of how far is the benchmark moving, how accessible are we, as a society, or how accessible is the web. You can't do that with manual processes. You can't gather and organize enough people to be able to assess 17 million web pages on a monthly basis. Like, that's just well beyond what is capable, of any society to try and do. But automated testing is quite easy to do that. So how do we try and pair the automated test that can do so much so quickly with the human tests that actually determine, does the rubber how does the rubber actually hit the road? What is the actual experience for a user? And just like other user research or user testing that is done, in the design world, really that's where we need to have more energy and um, more experience for developers, is to sort of get a sense of, like, how does this actually work with real people, and how does this actually work with real people with disabilities?
And I think it sounds like something folks maybe should pick up on there is maybe there's a thing where, as you're doing your user research, you're testing with individuals, right? There's probably
Mhm.
something about like thinking about mindfully how you're representing folks at different ability levels, whether they're temporal or permanent, in your testing, right? To make sure you're getting the knowledge of what it's like. Am I kind of hearing that correctly there too?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, certainly are organizations that are setting aside a portion of their user research budget to include people with disabilities. So, if you would think that if a quarter of the population had a disability, you would use that number as the 25% as a reference to say, well, how much of our time and energy are we going to spend, looking at people who have English as a second language, or who um, are engaging with, but have, a low literacy rate, or people who are blind, people, like, there's a lot of different kinds of disabilities out there that we could be be doing more research and gathering more information on in order to make sure that we're not missing something obvious when it comes to communicating, particularly from governments.
And on the topic of the automated tools they were talking about before, are there any that you would suggest folks look into in particular that they're kind of like maybe a standard deviation above the others in your experience?
I do really like accessibility insights as a tool. This is a an open source tool that Microsoft has put together that really highlights some of the best practices of open source, because they actually use another open source tool called Axe, or DQ's Axe, which is a wonderful accessibility scanning tool that is used by Google Lighthouse and others. But they contribute back to it. So Microsoft is not only a user of open source, but they're contributing back upstream to those projects. They're also extending it, trying to make it more useful for people to quickly provide a snapshot of where the problems are and how to address them. A huge challenge with any technology is, or reporting any bug, is how do you make it reproducible? And I don't know any other tool that does as much to make these accessibility errors reproducible, and provide a simple way to snapshot the URL, the what else do they capture? The XPath information to be able to access that, the error that's associated with the page, and they've just sort of built it together quite nicely for people to just drop into your Jira tickets and make it clear for anyone to be able to say, okay, this is a problem, this is how you can replicate it, and here's some ideas about how to fix that problem.
Continuing to think about the thread of some of these like technical tools that folks work with. At the start of our conversation today, we were already getting into content management systems, kind of talking about Drupal a bit, but in reality, a lot of folks work with some content management system or another for different web services. Are there any patterns or things of that nature folks should be looking out for if their primary thing is like maintaining or building on top of one of those?
Yeah. The it's really useful to for any piece of software that you're using to do some investigation on the accessibility. Do they have an accessibility statement? Do they have an accessibility team? If it's an open source project with an open source issue queue, you can say, what are the accessibility issues that are being talked about? Are they being addressed? If you're some products will have an accessibility conformance report that's public. So that's useful as well to go and say, what is the vendor claiming to be the accessibility problems that they know about, and how can they and how are they addressing them? Those have unfortunately largely become sales documents with the VPAT, the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. We're trying to change that and have worked with the GSA to build a tool called OpenACR. So the team at Civic Actions went and built this, both an open standard as well as a website editor that allows you to take information and provide it in a machine readable format, and also in a nice readable HTML format, and use an editor that allows you to ensure that the content is being produced in a standardized way. So there's, we're working to try and change how that is being managed, but these are things that you can look for. Say, like, how are they talking about accessibility? And you don't want to find, it's not that you don't want to find something that has no accessibility errors, because that probably just means that the project hasn't looked at accessibility, or they're covering up the information. You want to look at how are they dealing with these issues, and how are they fixing them, and are they doing that in a timely manner to make sure that as issues come up, they are addressed and responded to in an efficient manner.
If there's folks out there that are listening to us talk about all of this and they're getting really excited, like, man, I want to get and start doing this work. What's some advice that you would give those folks as they're, just trying to get started, maybe taking those first steps?
Firstly, there's there's so much to learn here. So there's some great newsletters out there. The Alley Weekly newsletter is probably the easiest starting point for people to understand accessibility. It has, if you sign up for it, there's a weekly sort of summary of issues and topics that come up that you can learn from. David Kennedy's been producing that for a number of years, and it's really really wonderful how he's summarized and organized information. There's certainly other good newsletters as well, but making sure you've got something in your inbox to keep that in mind. Also, we're all using open source projects in one way or the other. Finding some way to contribute back to those, looking for accessibility issues, and whether that's contributing a bug or asking a question or creating a pull request, all those things are useful to make sure that the projects that you're using are more aware of the interest in addressing accessibility as part of their regular build and release process. So if you're part of that and engaging with those open source communities, it can help a lot. The other thing is just to learn. There's events too that there's a free conference that the DQ organizes called AxeCon, and it's 2 days of free content. You just need to sign up, and you can watch these amazing videos from leaders around the world. There's a session called Inclusive Design 24 where they have speakers around the world who do 24 hours of programming on accessibility. There's events like GAD, the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, where there's so much interesting information that is pulled together and shared with the world. So, being part of that, engaging online, or finding ways to perhaps pitch a talk of your own. Those are also useful ways to get involved and to learn.
As we get close to our close of the conversation, we've had a fairly wide-ranging discussion, I think, on accessibility. As folks are kind of, letting it mull in their brains, like kind of letting it let thoughts form. What are some kind of couple of things that you'd really like them to take away and kind of bring into their day as they get to the end of the podcast?
I think that by picking up something like accessibility, or for that matter, sustainability, you take some additional lens to look at the work that you do in whatever your role is, and start to investigate and learn about how accessibility and the WCAG standards apply to the definition of your work. I think it's something that will help individuals become better at their craft, if they take the time to sort of see how this lens to thinking about technology can help them make sure that they are a better developer or content creator or designer. These are all things that, yes, it's a nice thing to be able to do, to say that you're contributing back on something as important as accessibility. But it's also clear that by taking the time to invest in this, to learn in this area, you're going to get additional skills and become increasingly valuable for whatever role you take on next. So definitely see this as being a really important piece of a learning journey to make sure that we're all able to be better at the work that we do.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Civic Tech Chat. I have no doubt folks have some valuable nuggets to take into their work and the way they go about building web services.
Thank you so much, Ryan. This is a fun conversation.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can check us out on the web at civictech.chat. There you'll find links to our Discord and other social media accounts. To keep up to date as episodes come out, subscribe to us on the podcast app of your choice. We'll see you next time.